Greetings, and welcome back to the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Alan Norris, Executive Chairman of Brookfield Properties Development Group and Brookfield Residential Properties. Mr. Norris joined Carma Developers in 1983 and became CEO in 1994. In 2011, Carma merged with Brookfield Homes to create Brookfield Residential, the flagship North American residential property company of Brookfield Asset Management. Under Mr. Norris's leadership, the company asset base grew to over $4.8 billion, with approximately 1,400 employees and operations in 16 major North American markets. Mr. Norris is also involved in the community, having recently chaired the Resolve Fundraising campaign to raise $120 million for affordable housing in Calgary. Mr. Norris is past chairman of the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and in 2018, the Calgary Chamber and SAIT awarded him an Honorary Bachelor Degree for his community work. He has also been inducted into the BILD Alberta Hall of Fame, and in 2019 was honored as a Fellow of the CPA. Mr. Norris holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Accounting and Economics, and 2 Chartered Accountant designations in Scotland and Canada. Among other things, we sat down and discussed a few lessons from 40 years of real estate investing and why housing prices are rising. Enjoy. This podcast episode is sponsored by Conate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Conate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info at conatewater.com or check out conatewater.com for more details. This podcast is sponsored by headracingcanada.com. Looking for high-performance ski gear this winter? In partnership with 4-time Olympian Manny Osborne Parody, headracingcanada.com is offering the lowest prices possible through its online storefront by passing brick-and-mortar savings on to customers. Check out headracingcanada.com for more info and get your high-performance ski gear for the upcoming season. Mr. Alan Norris, good morning. Thank you very much for doing this.
Good morning.
For the listener, you are the Executive Chairman of Brookfield Residential Properties?
That's correct. And also I oversee, as Executive Chairman, the development business for Brookfield in North America as well. I don't do the office buildings or the hotels but any sort of future development, and the residential side being the land and housing business. I'll oversee that, again, as an Executive Chair. I used to be CEO for 27 years for that business.
Also, to back up, for anyone that is listening, what is Brookfield?
Well, Brookfield overall is probably the largest alternative asset manager in the world now. I mean, it has over $850 billion of assets under management and dealing with insurance, infrastructure, private equity, real estate, and renewables. So it's a very large company. I mean, we've been part of the group for a long time before it got so big, and they've been a tremendous shareholder over the years.
Brookfield Properties would be more or less the real estate?
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, again, there's different segments within the real estate aspect. I think there's about $250 billion of the 850 is real estate. So it's into office buildings, shopping centers, hospitality, student housing, residential business, things like that. So,
how did you get into real estate and why?
I moved to Calgary back in 1980. I transferred with Deloitte's a CA firm. I did the audit of a company back in those days called New West, and it was one of the largest real estate companies in Western Canada. And so I did the audit of that. One of the individuals who was there moved over to Carma as its CFO, and he knew me and he needed some help. Carma was in difficulty at that time. This was 1983. Interest rates were the 18 to 20%, and real estate companies were in a bit of trouble. Murray Fox was his name, and Murray hired me to go over there as controller to work for him and to help restructure the company. So I got into it that way, and sort of we restructured the company and then tried to recapitalize it after that.
I read an article from CREB in 2020, and it outlined kind of your history, and one of the lines was in 1980, young 23-year-old Norris arrived in the city of Calgary. It was tough times. Did you have a sense that Calgary was going to pick up again, or did you sense opportunity, or was it?
I came over here for 2 years. Just the idea was just somewhere different, and then probably go back to Scotland. Stayed a third year, I met my wife, and we get the 4 kids and 9 grandkids later. It's, most of us been home for 43 years, and I probably didn't know how to spell real estate coming from Scotland. I fell in love with it here because, Calgary is such a dominant oil and gas town, and I felt that on the accounting side, you were really just doing the accounting, as opposed to in real estate, you can have much more influence over the business. I'm not saying everybody's a homeowner, but everybody's got some perspective of real estate, whereas it tends to be more the geologists and things on the oil and gas side that maybe dominate the management ranks.
Did you have any idea the opportunity that existed in Calgary in the 80s, or were you just hoping to pay the bills?
I wanted to go somewhere that it wasn't. I'd worked in the London office for a little bit. I was out of the Glasgow office, but had some clients down in London. I just felt the office was so large. And so I was looking for somewhere that Toronto didn't really fit the pistol, but I was looking at other countries around the world that gave me a number of options. Just thought I'd try Calgary, just do something different.
I thought today, obviously, we structured the conversation more or less around real estate. So maybe to fast forward to today and current issues around real estate, one of the main questions or concerns these days are, why are real estate prices so high? If we were to zoom out in a Canadian level, maybe Calgary level, why are we at where we're at?
If you take a look at the history we've got, currently we've got a huge influx of people coming to the country through immigration. Some, from a refugee point of view, say Ukraine and things. But we've always been in that 300 to 325,000 range for immigration. The feds want to get to 500,000 or even 525. We've traditionally in Canada only been building 200 to maybe 220,000 homes a year. If you take a look at maybe 2.2, 2.3 persons per household, we've been under building for quite some time. That ignores natural growth, being births over deaths. So we've chronically been under building, and a lot of the function of that comes back down to a disconnect between the 3 levels of government. You have municipal governments basically calling the shots with respect to approvals. The red tape has gone through the roof with respect to getting things approved. I'm a huge believer that we need to know what the playing field is if you're going to be developing new communities, housing, and there has to be input, and it can't be a free-for-all. But we've got to the point where so much of it is not really adding value, and we have to streamline that process. There has to be dot the I's, cross the T's with respect to new development, but it can be simpler, and it can be then they're more responsive. We're also challenged, quite honestly. We've had a decline in the number of people moving into the trades. I've been actively trying to work on that for many, many years. Since 1998, we set up a not-for-profit being the Carma Centre for Excellence, which was to try and promote getting kids from high school and middle school interested in the trades. It culminated with a lot of work from our industry generally. We managed to raise the profile, and the new trades building at SAIT is a result of some of that, as well as lobbying from SAIT. SAIT was part of the initial Carma Centre that we did in 1998. But we're falling back again, I think. There's not a natural, parents are not necessarily influencing their kids to follow a career in trades. And many kids are not that interested in it, looking instead at more technology initiatives and things. And we have a lot to blame as an industry. Probably the most innovative thing we've done in the last 30 years is the nail gun. So we have a lot to answer for as an industry as well. But we can't build more if we don't get more people involved in the trades as well. And we do have to bring technology to the fore to try and accomplish a lot of this.
Demand is outpacing supply.
It is.
Have these problems been visible for a while, or is it just kind of caught up all of a sudden?
It's been there, but under the surface. The 2 large centres that have always been challenged have been Toronto and Vancouver. Calgary has been less so, but now we're seeing a lot of interprovincial migration and some direct international migration coming into the province. It typically would be about 80% of the migration would go to Toronto and Vancouver, and then there'd be a bit of a time lag before some of those families then said, okay, I'm going to move. It's getting too expensive in Toronto or Vancouver. The pricing there in both those cities has borne no relationship with people's income for quite some time. So that's not a good environment. We don't want to get to that point in Calgary, but we're getting we could be there now based on the latest stats that we're talking about and the fact that so many people are moving to the province.
It seems like the problem is louder in Canada. Is it the same in the USA? Are they facing the same problems?
There's not as much immigration there now. If you recall what fueled a lot of the work before, there was a huge in-migration to the US. If anything, they're putting up barriers to immigration. The challenge that the US is going to have in many cases is that as they de-globalize, or whatever we want to call it, where they're trying to internalize a lot of their supply chain because of what happened during the pandemic, they're going to put more industrial and people to work in the US. And we will have an issue in the US as well if they do not allow some degree of immigration. So we sold more industrial land probably in the last 4 or 5 years during the pandemic and shortly thereafter, because a lot of them, whether it be logistics or manufacturing plants, chip plants, all sorts of things, there's a lot of stuff going on so that we do not feel beholden to the global supply chain.
Reshoring.
Yes, exactly.
In a nutshell, perhaps the one suggestion would be increased supply.
Correct. Now that could be labor. We have the land mass, shall we say. The question is how we want to utilize it.
The critic would say supply is great, and I love all the affordable housing options that are built, but a lot of times the neighborhoods on the peripheral of the city may be characterized as lacking character. What is the solution to that, and how do you make sure people like where they're living, so to speak?
I'd like to think that people vote with their wallet. There's a great community here, Garrison Woods, for instance, but that was government-owned land. They didn't have to pay for it, so they just developed it. If you take a look at Mackenzie Town down in the southeast, that was a community that we developed, and we're very proud of it. And that was breaking the norm by alley loaded, new urbanism, those types of things. And so the density that we have on the suburban edge is anywhere between 10 and 12 units per acre, which is far more dense than what I call the circle around the core. The old communities of Britannia, Acadia, I'm just picking a few, Capitol Hill in the north, things like that. Many of them are only 4 or 5 units per acre. Whereas on the suburban edge, we're 10, 12 units per acre. So there's a lot of density taking place in the new developments. And I'm not debating the new housing strategy that was just approved on Saturday, but it's going to theoretically allow more density in some of the established communities, which is going to be interesting to see how that develops, because there's still going to be permits required and things of that nature to change the profile.
One of the tools that the federal government or the Bank of Canada have is interest rates to try and spur lending and increase growth. In your opinion, interest rates have been on the rise, but going forward, do you think we need to keep rates where they are, go higher, go lower? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I'd like to hope that we've dealt with the inflation dragon reasonably well, both sides of the border, and that we can stay stable for some time. I'm not sure we'll see significant drops. I don't see us being in a yo-yo effect where 2.5% mortgages, 3% mortgages, and now we're up in the US at 7% and things. I don't think we'll see them coming back down to that very, very low situation we had. Candidly, I think the Bank of Canada and the Fed are both going to have to they'll move down slightly, but I don't see it happening till late 24, 25 at the earliest. And even then, I think it will just come down slightly, because I still think they have to have the tools in the toolbox to deal with any potential recession that comes along. And so their primary tool is going to be able to lower interest rates. If they come down too early without the challenges of a recession, then they lose some of the tools in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Some people were expecting a recession the last year or two and have called for that, but yet we're not, don't seem to be entering a recession.
I would say that the labor market has been stronger than I think most of the economists were expecting. There was still a fair bit of free money that people had coming out of the pandemic. And I don't think there was that understanding of the depth of a better balance sheet from a personal point of view, especially from a US point of view. So it's interesting because, I mean, I give the example of the US housing market right now, because the consumer down there, the homeowner is locking in for a 30-year mortgage. What we've seen is very few existing homeowners are selling their homes. They've got a 2.5-3% mortgage. If they were to sell their home and go to buy another one, they're in that 7 to 7.2% mortgage range. So hence, there's very little product coming from the resale side, which is why some of the new home builders are actually seeing higher volumes. So they're taking a little bit of market share on the mix. Now, that once interest rates flatten out, well, they come down a little bit, but once you get a little bit more certainty that we think they're stable, then I think more resale people will come to the marketplace. In Canada, it's a different situation because we typically go 3 years, 5 years and renew. I think what you're seeing probably is banks, even with the higher rates when people are renewing, I would think some of the banks are working with their customers. There's probably good equity in the home, but the payments are the challenge. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I think you'll see some reamortization of some of the mortgages is what will happen so that they can try and keep people in similar monthly payment schedule.
Does it worry you when the 5 years start to renew at 7%?
Yeah, it does. But I worry for those individuals. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think some of the institutions will try and keep the payments very close to that. Mm-hmm. But that means they're effective. If they're 10 years into a mortgage and then they re-am it at 25, I mean, that's the equivalent of a 35-year mortgage. That they're just paying a lot of money for that to have the privilege of home ownership. So the challenge of also of higher interest rates obviously is on new rental supply and things like that. So sometimes it doesn't pencil, but the rent is going through the roof in Calgary right now. There's been talk for rent control. Challenge with rent control, and I'm not speaking as a developer that builds a lot of rental. We don't tend to, but the challenge is you will put a complete stop to new rental construction if there is rent control, because you're not going to have the return and to do it. So it's not an easy answer. So the risk you run is you impose rent control and you try and open up new builds in all the communities. It's like a foot on the gas, foot on the brake. The rent control will not allow new development to take place, new construction to take place. So we have to find some balance there. You don't want it to be too government controlled, but you want to make sure it's not free for all as well.
Mm-hmm. Recession.
Yeah.
We're not going into a recession. We are going to a recession.
I think we could probably see a technical recession. Two quarters back to back, negative GDP. But I mean, I don't see it being it's maybe a dip in the water type of thing. I don't think it's being a big situation. I mean, the challenge is we're still seeing a lot of inflationary pressure. I mean, we know the UAW, for instance, down in the States. I mean, it seems off the chart, but I get it and all the rest of it. But I just, and the pilots, I mean, the American Airlines, what they got and all the rest of it. So some of that is still got to take effect through the economy. I mean, those were headline numbers and are still to be determined on the UAW side. A lot of the time lag before some of that filters through the economy takes a bit of time. I mean, meeting every 30 days, I think, is just like, I don't know. I mean, it's like this business. I mean, in the land and housing business, there's nothing material happens in 30 days. I mean, it takes us so long to build a house, and it can be a 10-year, 15 years to develop a community.
The headlines is that you raise interest rates, inflation goes down. It's kind of this linear relationship. Do you think it's too simplistic to view it that way, and that we're kind of dealing with a complex system that has a lot of variables, maybe more so than they're suggested?
There's so many variables. I totally agree with you. I mean, these are just two aspects that we're talking about. There are far, far too many other. I mean, globalization. So you're looking at some of the challenges in the supply chain, the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, there's a whole host of, sanctions on Russia, oil. I mean, you look at where Europe is. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on. It's a much too oversimplification to call just on interest rates. I totally agree. But that's really only one of the two tools that the Fed's got is the tightening or easing on interest rates.
Knowing that it's a complex system, how does Brookfield deal with that? How do you plan? How do you deal with strategy? Do you think of it that way?
Yeah, speaking on the residential development and housing, land and housing and ongoing development, you just have to look at some of the macro factors and knowing that you can mitigate some aspects of risk, but you can't mitigate all. Who was planning for a pandemic and who would have realized that the pandemic would have given a boost to housing and housing not necessarily in the growth corridor, where the jobs were, because of remote working. So that's not something you can ever plan for. But you're looking at broad trends and saying, okay, in Canada, I'm feeling fairly good with respect to immigration. We're underbuilding. We have a fair bit of land. The question is, how do we actually develop it and get it built and respond to that? So you can look at it in some sort of cycles. In the US, I look at it and the broader strokes is I don't see immigration being solved too quickly in the US, just the way the political mood is. But I do see as we said, the globalization and the whatever the terminology is, but the internalization of the supply chain, which is going to create employment opportunities for many people in the US. But it's going to be more expensive because you're not going to be able to build, you're not going to be able to develop the chips as cheaply in Glendale, Arizona as you can in Taiwan. It's just not going to happen. So that in itself is an inflationary move. The Inflation Reduction Act, as Biden would call it, was completely inflationary. And so you get the Fed trying to deal with moving interest rates up, and you get the government doing an Inflation Reduction Act, both contradictory to one another. So there's only so many variables you can deal with when you're in the business, and you can't, I'm not suggesting stupidity, but some inconsistencies between government actions and what they do some things from a political point of view, and they're trying to do some other things responsibly, and many of them conflict.
Mm-hmm. The point of Brookfield is to build houses and develop real estate to make money. So in a scenario like this, from your perspective, how does Brookfield keep its competitive advantage? Is it proprietary building techniques? Is it buying real estate on the low, or how do you get ahead?
I've been doing this for 40 years, and we've gone through a lot of different cycles. We've done well over the years.
Without giving away your secrets.
Well, there's some of it. You want to buy, people keep saying location. That's a bit of an overstatement, but you want to be in cities where you think there is, opportunities. We started off in this city in 1958. So we've been in business here for over 65 years. You do quality communities, you build quality product, and you have good people. And it sounds a bit of an oversimplification, but we're now in 25 markets in North America. And so we follow similar principles, but each market is different. But you follow similar principles as to how you want to do it. But an overriding concept in this one is that this business is very capital intensive, and you've got to finance yourself conservatively and never be in a situation where somebody else is telling you when you have to monetize an asset, whether it be because you've got debt on it and then somebody says they want to call it, or whether you have to monetize it because you need to pay the bills. So we've been very fortunate. When I came in to begin with, with the restructuring that we completed in 1985 and 86 showed a lot. I was just in my 20s, and it showed some of the challenges as to why things happened. They had a lot of debt, and the cycle went down. And so all of a sudden, the asset might still be a great asset if you could have the patience to hold it. But when somebody else is telling you to sell it, then that's not a good solution. So that's just some of the basics with respect to that. And it's a depleting asset. So it's not like building an office building for 500,000 square feet and you're just worried about yield on them. When you sell a house, it's done. So if you want to build 3,500 homes a year, you're reinventing yourself each time.
The common advice is to avoid debt, but the tempting thing is that when you're growing, it's easy to take on a little debt to take advantage and grow, and sometimes that's required to build a business. Is there a tension there at times?
Yeah, you've got to find the right mix. You obviously 100% equity is not good. You're not going to make the returns for your shareholders. Some balance that the philosophy I've always had is that the most you want to really have from a debt point of view should be equivalent to your work in progress, something that is monetizable within the next 12 to 18 months. anything, if you buy a piece of land that you think you can develop over 10 years, that should be equity. But, and it's not as specific as each house is a piece of debt. It's just a notional approach to having, if we've got $1.7 billion of debt, I'd like to think we've got about $1.7 billion in short-term land and housing inventory. So that's sort of the way we've tried to do it over the years.
Has there been times in your career where that was tempting to reach, so to speak, for assets that maybe you had to take on some debt?
We've been fortunate that the shareholder we had being Brookfield is very, very supportive. And when opportunities came along, if we wanted to grow, they supported the growth, but did it in a responsible financial fashion and supported our approach on equity versus debt, knowing that nothing happens overnight in this business. And so you don't want to be a situation where you just hit the wrong part of the cycle and you lose all the stuff you've worked so hard for.
One of the main jobs of a CEO or executive chairman or any leader in a business is capital allocation.
Yep.
When you look at your assets and single family housing or all the various things you have, is there one that sticks out in terms of rate of return for the business that you lean towards?
Buying land at the right time in the cycle is probably one of the best returns if you do it properly, and that is equity. The single family housing tends to be a method of monetizing. It's the final monetization of some aspect of the community and the land. So it tends to be, because you can get some reasonable margins, but they're very constant. Everything ends up being priced to the land effectively, and the margins are very consistent all across the city for similar product from all the builders because it's so competitive. So you either bought the land well or you didn't. So it tends to be, and if you've done a good job in the community, the way we try and measure it after the fact is you try and look at the resale values in the communities that you've developed over the last 20, 30 years. And if your resale value in a comparison with a neighboring community is higher, then you take some pride in the fact that you did the right. You learn from the amenities you put into the communities.
It may be proprietary, but what to you is a good rate of return for real estate investments?
You're probably looking to get, an 18% to 20% return, annualized return on long-term land. Obviously, if you buy it here in year one, you might not start to develop it for year 5. So, then it could go year 5 to year 15. So that 18 to 20 is higher during the actual development time, if you've done it properly.
Time was the other factor in ROI. Do you ever expedite your developments to get the money back sooner, or is there?
I think we've always tried to, again, with the benefit of a great shareholder, I think we've always tried to do the right thing by the asset, irregardless. And so we've never been under pressure to do something that's the wrong thing for the asset. So I would say we haven't had to do that.
Looking at failures, the graveyard, so to speak, do you look at other developments or lessons from the industry to take lessons from things that didn't work out, or maybe errors within the company that didn't work out in the past?
Yeah, we've had a few. Fortunately, they've not been big, but you need to have the odd failure. Otherwise, you're not reaching far enough on some things. I don't think we overreach for all the reasons I said before, but you're going to have the odd failure with respect to why did we design it this way, or what this product, it just didn't work. Those types of things. I'd like to think they're fairly small in nature, but there's definitely some. But there's no, it's always, you don't want to be betting the farm, betting the company on one idea or, a particular direction.
Is there a common mistake that you see if you look back through the years on real estate development?
Yeah, most of it is debt related. Even if you pick the wrong product and you have to retool something, as long as you don't have debt hanging over you on it, usually you have time on your side to fix it and live to fight another day. There's a lot of companies that, as I said, I get in the business in 1983. There's a lot of companies that started out around by that time because they emerged from the national energy policy, the high interest rates, who are still around and are great builders and developers since then. But there's been a lot that have fallen by the wayside because they didn't do the right things.
The playing field can be competitive at times. When you look around, what do you think separates the best developers from the rest? Is it good capital allocation? Is it awareness of the market, right timing? What do you think makes a good real estate developer?
On the development side, I'll speak because that's mostly on the land and community development. I mean, you've got to be well capitalized. You've got to have good people. You've got to buy good land, and you've got to have good designs from a community point of view so that you can then sell lots to builders, whether it be your own building group or you're selling to other builders. I mean, we typically will build on our own lots, maybe up to 20, 25% of the lots. The rest of the lots that we develop in the community will be sold to third-party builders to bring a variety of product to the community as opposed to a homogeneous community, which is just our builder. So we want to give the consumer choices.
Best real estate deal you ever saw?
We did a very nice deal down in California a number of years ago. I won't go through the numbers, but it sort of gave a return like 5 times over. And we took a big leap to buy it. I mean, it cost us over $250 million. We partnered up with somebody else to sell them some lots and some apartment sites very quickly and got most of that money back on day 2. And then had a whole bunch of real estate in front of us. And it was and that was one of the benefits of being part of Brookfield, was that we knew we had a 2 to 3 day gap between the closing of the deal and then getting the money in from the other people we had back to back. And so we did a bridge loan for that amount of money for 3 days. And I think the interest cost me $32,000 or something. So, but again, part of the benefit of being part of the Brookfield group was that we could do that. And we had a very strong counterparty on the other side, a large company similar to ourselves that was more into the apartment side and wanted to secure all the sites. And it still gave us a great track, for the next 5-6 years. And it was a very, very good transaction.
You need capital to be a successful real estate developer. Do you think it's possible to be an entrepreneur in the space, or is it too expensive?
It's becoming more and more costly. It's very, you can start off small, but it's, I worry that we are losing some of the small developer. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, some of this housing strategy for Calgary is going to allow smaller players to come in and do small builds because it's going to be much more, if you can go through the brain damage to get the approvals to do stuff. And so that will deal more with them. But if you wanted to do something on the suburban edge, the capital you need to do it is huge.
Mm-hmm. Crossroads of your career. Do you remember a time when things started to go really well for you? And
yeah, I'm not one to look back, quite honestly. I mean, we just kept going and trying to do what we thought was right. And it was probably only when I got close to thinking about retiring and just stepping into the chair role and not doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff, you start to look back a little bit and reflect, and then you realize, well, we did a lot of good things. So it was good. I mean, it's very reflective. You meet some really good people in this business, people that you've known now I've known many of the builders for 30, 35 years, become good friends, and they build quality product, but we all compete against each other. But the good thing I'd like to say is that we compete fiercely with respect to that customer. But as an industry, there's probably no other industry in this city has come together as much as our industry to try and do not-for-profit give-backs. The SAIT Trades building was one of them. I chaired the Resolve homelessness campaign, and 11 builders all came to the table just for the initial donation of $15.4 million. And then the industry raised $27 million, our industry, and the whole campaign raised $75 million to deal with building projects for the homeless and vulnerable Calgarians. So I get nothing but respect for all the other individuals in the business who, as I say, we fiercely compete, but when the need is there, we completely cooperate with one another to try and make the city better.
If you look around, do you take inspiration from any other developers? Who do you look towards for advice, or is there anybody that stands out?
I mean, I think we all know in the city. I mean, I got a lot of colleagues down in the US because we've been in the US for such a long time. And you see, I mean, things are on a much larger scale down there just because the population is 10 times over. So there's a number of folks down there that, I mean, I have all the time in the world for the folks I grew up with here, on the industry side. I learned a lot from, my predecessor, Murray Fox, who was here. And then I stepped in as, CEO in 94 when he left, and just good business principles. I mean, running this business is, I don't know whether I could run an oil and gas company or not. I didn't know whether I could run a real estate company. But you try and you can't just turn around and say we're making widgets and that's that. I mean, there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot, the to-do list that I do every day is an interesting one because I'm never sure I get through any of it, even today, to this point, albeit a lot of the stuff's personal now on my list. Yeah. But before, there's so many moving parts to this business, and you're interfacing on the community side, the city side, approvals, builders, customers, so many different things which make it very rewarding.
Calgary was or maybe still is, an undervalued market, a hidden gem, if you will. Do you still see it that way with lots of opportunity, or?
I think I'm feeling more optimistic about Calgary in the last year and a half looking forward than I was probably 5 years ago. I was nervous about Calgary 5 years ago. I see a lot of positive things happening on companies coming here. I mean, the idea with respect to trying to get some of the university, the campuses downtown, convert some of the B and C buildings into student housing, I think is an excellent idea. I mean, the challenge of switching up some of the old office buildings to marketable apartments, I struggle with that a little bit just because of the core of the building and the design. And you're taking a lot of market risk because if it doesn't appeal to, boomers or whoever wants to move in there, with all due respect to students, they're less choosy on student housing. And therefore, I think there's a solid benefit. And it also, at the same time, also helps to revitalize the downtown and bring some life back to the downtown area.
You touched on it just now, but is there a silver bullet for downtown Calgary? Does it just take time to soak up the extra space, or?
Well, we're going to have to get rid of some buildings. We're going to have to redo some buildings. And I do think it does come back, but when we're starting off from a pretty high vacancy rate, some of it should just get knocked down and retooled, but some of them can be done from a student housing point of view, depending on how we do the campus, for universities, whether it be Mount Royal, whether it be EFC, those types of things. I'm not quite sure what scale we can do there, but it's a step in the right direction.
If you were to go back, if you were 30 years old again, maybe you had some cash as a real estate developer in Calgary and you were looking around, what would you do? What would your advice be?
That's a good question. When I first moved to Canada, I didn't have any cash, so I didn't have that choice. I needed a job so I could actually pay the bills. So I don't know what I would have done if I wasn't joining a company that was paying me a salary, because I had nothing of my own money to go into anything. You probably start small and just look at some projects and get some experience, and whether it just be a fourplex or whether it be something along those lines, try and get friends and family to, help support just to get the first one under your belt. Learn from those things, learn the processes. But at some point, you'll need some degree of scale. That's the challenge. I mean, you can do some of the stuff to get by initially, but if the land is priced appropriately, you're not working for a huge, huge margin. Again, it reverts back to the land. And if somebody sees the opportunity, they will price the land such that you will make, X return. X return maybe doesn't pay what you need to get paid for an annual salary or the equivalent thereof. So then you need scale, and then you need people. So you need to come up with a realistic business plan as to what you think you can get out of, if you're trying to build a fourplex or something like that, it's going to take you probably 18 months. And so, what are you actually getting out of that? And what does that mean? What's an imputed salary you're really getting? Or is this just a step along the way and you've got some money behind you that you don't need to be drawing it out and you can roll the money into other things? So it's not easy. It's not easy. But you'd be looking at some of those opportunities early on to get your feet wet.
I remember hearing an interview with Sam Zell at one point where, when he was starting out, he preferred the rental properties that he could optimize because of the cash flow instead of buying on spec.
Yes.
Perhaps that's the way to start.
No, that's exactly right, because at least you've got some cash flow from on day one, day two, after you buy it. If you're going into the building side, you don't monetize for 18 months. So you definitely have to have a fair bit of money coming, behind you to get started. And then it rolls. But you need a little bit of luck to sort of go through that, because, and some support, to get there, because it'll be difficult for some of the banks to finance that when you get no track record. So for the most part, it's friends and family that's going to give you something there, or somebody that's a mentor, something along those lines that believes in you.
Well, that's great conversation. I think that kind of is the waterfront on real estate from your perspective in Brookfield. So
thanks, Taylor.
Thanks for your time.
I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.
Cheers.
That's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you like what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.